Thank you. I feel very honored to be here and very happy. And I feel very apologetic because I have a croaky voice today that will not go away. I also feel a bit nervous because Lament for Siavash is not an easy book to present. It's not like a novel where you might pull out a few pieces of interesting dialogue or expository writing and read them aloud. It's a scholarly analysis that covers Iranian mythology and religion, epic history, and post-Islamic history, mysticism, and philosophy. Meskoob's analysis, it's really an exegesis of the story of Siavash. And his take on life, as best I can make out in this book, is a humanist and essentially existentialist outlook. But before we go there, I'd like to tell you about the background of this translation and then situate Ferdowsi and Siavash in northeastern Iran, in Greater Khorasan, so that you can follow them in your mind on the map. I'll then outline the story of Siavash and his death and resurrection in the form of his son Kay Khosrow, and point out the major themes that Meskoob extricates from the story and the protagonists whose lives illustrate those themes. And then I'll end on what I consider to be the key theme in the book, which happens to apply to the lives and realities of all of us in this room, which is why the book, although scholarly, is not purely academic. Spoiler alert, the key theme in the book is choice, consciousness, and free will. Meskoob was a friend of my father's, very close. I had studied through 9th grade in Tehran before I was sent off to boarding school in England. When I came back at around age 16, I wanted to improve my Persian. I talked to my father, who talked to Meskoob, who agreed to give me private lessons. He started me off on the Shahnameh, which I later learned was a book he was never without. His other favorite book was Don Quixote. As you know, the Shahnameh, the national book, the national epic of Iran, the Book of Kings, as it is translated, covers mythology, creation, and then history to the end of the Sasanian Empire and the Arab conquest of Iran in the 7th century. In between myth and history lies epic, which is the largest portion of the book and where we find the story of Siavash. For our first session, Meskoob told me to bring along any one of the 9 volumes of the Moscow critical edition of the Shahnameh, open up to a page at random, and read. This was very thrilling, but very, very embarrassing. My Persian improved, though, a little bit over time. And we read a lot of poetry from Manuchehri, who was a contemporary of Ferdowsi's, used a lot of Arabic words, to Gorgani, Nizami, and other poets. And then one day, he pulled the book from a shelf and said he was going to read me one of the most exquisite pieces of Persian prose ever written. It is terse to a fault, he said, and free of even a single superfluous or redundant word. What he read was a famous passage from Bayhaqi's history that is called Zikr Bardar Kardan Hasanak Vazir, the account of the hanging of Hasanak the Vizier. Bayhaqi was born in a town near Tus, Ferdowsi's birthplace in Khorasan. He was about 54, 55 years younger And so he was about 15 when Ferdowsi finished the Shahnameh in the year 1010. He, Bayhaqi that is, served at the Ghaznavid court as a fairly high-ranking bureaucrat. And then he devoted the last 2 decades of his life to write a 30-volume history of the Ghaznavids that is remarkably accurate and so richly detailed that it is considered a literary masterpiece. In the passage that Meskoob read, Bayhaqi relates that Hasanak, who was born in Balkh and was about his own age. So Bayhaqi and Hasanak are about the same age. He served as the trusted vizier of Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi until the end of his reign in 1030. When the Sultan died, Bayhaqi backed the younger of his twins to be heir. That reign was brief and contentious. So when the older twin took over, Hasanak was convicted by his political opponent of a long-standing charge of being an Ismaili Shia. The Ghaznavids were Sunni. Hasanak was jailed in Balkh. He was tormented and tortured. And following a fatwa by the Caliph of Baghdad, led to the gallows in 1032, and standing among a crowd of mourning supporters, stripped, stoned, and hanged. I watched Meskoob pull himself up into the chair very stiffly as he read, his brow tightened, I'm going to get emotional just remembering that. His cheeks flushed and his eyes filled with tears. Overcome, he was so overcome by words so shockingly lucid and elegant, they moved the reader. Well, they moved him to tears, even after repeat readings. Bayhaqi ends the story with, then everyone left the gallows و حسنک تنها ماند چنان که تنها آمده بود از شکم مادر. And Hasanak was left alone as he had come alone from his mother's belly. I mean, what can I say? Imagine how incredibly privileged I feel to have had the opportunity to translate a work on the Shahnameh written by Meskoob in a style that pays homage to Bayhaqi. In my formal schooling, literature had meant memorizing poetry and writing asinine school essays. None of it meant anything. We were never taught that words affect our consciousness, even perhaps our experience of life. But later on, when I was at graduate school studying comparative mythology, I learned that our brains are actually wired to invent words and string them into stories to make sense of life and give it meaning. Yuval Harari speaks of the complex of myths that we live by, myths of power, of order, of progress, of identity. Meskoob had let me take a peek at that discourse in a formative period in my life. I'd like to thank Professor Milani, who greenlighted the project to translate this work, and who gave me his trust and support throughout, and for arranging today's meeting. I'm also indebted to Muhammad Batmanglij, who agreed to publish the translation at Mage and who reviewed my drafts meticulously and with an incredible sense of caring. Lament would not have seen the light without the generous support of the Iranian Studies program at Stanford, nor would it have taken its current shape without the input of Mage and their team of editors. About the translation itself, the easy part was the prelude, which is a synopsis of the story of Siavash, so telegraphic, no translator could mess it up even if they tried. But the next chapters, main chapters, Twilight, Night, and Dawn, are a different story. I found out that to capture Meskoob's prose in those chapters, I had to go freestyle, which I wouldn't dream of attempting. Back in 1985, I translated a short memoir that he wrote called Musafirnameh, Notes by a Traveler. And very soon I found out he did not like anyone tampering with his words. So that's the rule I followed in Lament. But of course, much is lost in translation. The tone and intonation of Persian, the alliterations and the assonance, the parallelisms and puns, the texture and the beat, the syntax and the phraseology, in short, the poetry of the prose. But I have kept faithful to the original as far as possible, including very humbly in my translations of the verses of the Shahnameh that are interspersed throughout. Ferdowsi composed the Shahnameh under the patronage of the Samanids. He was 37 when he started and finished 17 years later in 994. The Samanids were a Persian nobility, landowning nobility, who ruled under the authority of the Abbasid Caliphate. The eastern part of their empire included Greater Khorasan, stretching from the Caspian shores, Caspian coast, into Turkmenistan in the north, and into Sistan and parts of Afghanistan in the south. In the Shahnameh, this area is the seat of the Iranians. It's ruled by Kay Khosrow. In the Shahnameh, in the story of Siavash, it's ruled by Kay Khosrow. And it is also where Siavash is born, this area of Greater Khorasan. Greater Khorasan, though, extended east into Transoxania, across the Oxus River that goes from Afghanistan all the way up to the Aral Sea. It's called Amudarya in Persian. So Greater Khorasan stretches into lower Central Asia up to the border of Xinjiang in China, Qin Machin in the epic. In the Shahnameh, this area, Transoxania, is the seat of the Turanians, ruled by their king, Afrasiab. So much for geography. As for Ferdowsi's cultural landscape, an indelible signature of Samanid rule during the 9th to the end of the 10th century was their patronage of the New Persian language, where Arabic had been dominant for some 200 years. So in the 9th century, we have Rudaki in Tajikistan and Farabi up here in Kazakhstan. We have, maybe I should actually have told you that, just to give you more on the geography, the Transoxania, which I mentioned is the land of the Turanians, includes Uzbekistan, to the east of present-day Khorasan, Uzbekistan, and then clockwise, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. That's Transoxania. So when New Persian is born and starts flourishing like crazy, we have Rudaki in the 9th century, and in Tajikistan, and Farabi in Kazakhstan. In the 10th century, we have Daghighi and Ferdowsi himself here in Khorasan, and Avicenna in Uzbekistan, and even Farabi from Khwarazm nearby, Biruni from born in Khwarazm nearby, who wrote most of his work in Arabic, he was a scientist, wrote one treatise in Persian on math, geometry, astronomy, and music. So Persian was this important. Incidentally, Biruni places Afrasiab and Siavash in Khwarazm, in his own birthplace. He sort of claims them. So the other cultural signature of the Samanid era that influenced Ferdowsi was the revival of Iran's ancient identity and culture, which they promoted from their capital in Samarkand and later in Bukhara, very vigorously, to the point that by the early 10th century, they had gained independence from the Abbasids. Ferdowsi completed a second version of the Shahnameh under the next dynast, Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi, whose vizier Hasanak, you remember, was a Persian from Balkh. The Ghaznavis were Persianate people of Turkic origin and had their capital in Ghazni in Afghanistan. The history of this era radically, this is what's important in Lament, is that the history of this era radically altered the ethnicity of the main players in the Shahnameh and in our story. In Avestan mythology, Iranians and Turanians are of the same ethnicity, they worship the same gods, they are born of the two sons of Feridun, Tur, and Iraj. When Feridun divided his realm among his three sons, Tur got Turan, farther out, Iraj got Iran. But from the get-go, Tur had his eyes on Iran. He was jealous and tried to annex it. And so that's where the enmity between the Iranians and the Turanians started. Otherwise, they were cousins. Turan, then, is where Siavash, in our story, takes refuge. He marries the king's daughter, builds a fortress and then a magnificent city, and meets his death. The bulk of the story of Siavash is taken up by the wars of vengeance over his death between the Iranians and the Turanians. These myths of these wars reflect, in an indirect way, we cannot place them, pinpoint them exactly, but they reflect ancient rivalries, territorial rivalries among Iranian tribes in Central Asia and into Greater Khorasan. At the same time as Turkic tribes in Central Asia regularly migrated and invaded and raided Iranian settlements. In later times, Turkic advances had been checked by the famous armored cavalry of the Parthians and later by the Sasanians. But by the 10th century, Ferdowsi's time, Turks had established a military and administrative rule over much of northeastern Iran, which is why in the epic, Ferdowsi calls the Turanians Turks, that is, non-Iranians. It's a complete radical change of ethnic identity. Sultan Mahmud Ghaznavi, who is a Persian son of a Turkic slave commander, did not appreciate that ethnic profiling and withheld his patronage from the poet, much to Ferdowsi's chagrin. So Iran's cultural and political landscape during the 9th to the 11th century, which we've covered in like 2 minutes, is more complicated than that. But this sketch helps us relate to Ferdowsi versifying the Iranian national epic, sitting as he was pressed between the Turkic conquerors from the east and Arabs from the west. So now we begin to talk about the book, the synopsis. How many of you know the story? I want to know how many words to use. Okay, I guess I have to, I'll go through it. I'll try to keep it short, but give you the main lines. So Siavash is the son of Kay Khosrow, who's king of Iran. He is a paragon of virtue and beauty, body and soul. This is our main hero, Siavash. His stepmother, Sūg-e, is infatuated with the youth. And when he spurns her love, she goes crazy. She raises hell and accuses him of sexual assault. Siavash proves his innocence by riding his black horse, Shabrang. You know the stories, I keep seeing you smiling. Riding his horse, Shabrang, through mountains of fire. And then to get away from these two people, his father and stepmother, goes away to fight Afrasiab, who's always on the border of Oxus trying to penetrate Iran. But the two, Afrasiab and Siavash, enter a peace pact, take an oath. Kavus, Siavash's father, who's not always a wise man and who's erratic, disapproves and wants him to break the oath and to send all the hostages that he has in his care to Iran, to Kavus, so he can kill them. Siavash refuses. And his only recourse is to take refuge with Afrasiab in Tehran. Afrasiab actually grows to love him, so much so that he cannot bear life without Siavash's company. Soon enough, Siavash marries Afrasiab's daughter, Farangis. He builds a fabulous city where they reside and rules as a provincial king. But Afrasiab is tricked by his brother, who's very jealous, into thinking that Siavash is plotting to kill him. So Afrasiab summons the guy. Siavash knows this is his end, and yet decides to go, but not before leaving his armor with his wife Farangis and telling her how to get back to Iran when their child, she's pregnant, when their child is born. He shows her the escape route to Iran and comes to Afrasiab. The armies line up, Afrasiab, Garsivaz, they're in there for preemptive revenge and have Siavash beheaded. But not before he tells his horse, Shabrang, where to go and hide and wait. When his head is cut off, the blood that drops on the ground sprouts a plant, a fern called Siavash, that will never wither, nor will it ever die, even if it is cut down. When news of Siavash's death reached Iran, Rostam, the hero Rostam, who had actually raised Siavash away from court, trained him in archery, in honesty, in truth, in hunting and feasting. As a prince, Rostam flies into a rage, slays Sūg-e, and then unleashes an indiscriminate slash and burn campaign massacring the Turanians. Afrasiab counterattacks, and Iran suffers a 7-year famine. Meantime, the good news is that Kay Khosrow is born. Afrasiab, the maternal grandfather, learns in a dream that the infant is bad news and wants him killed. But his wise and very decent general, Piran, Afrasiab's general, Piran, intervenes, and the infant is sent off to be raised by shepherds. 10 years later, Piran brings Kay Khosrow to meet his grandfather, but tells him, you want to save your skin, act like an idiot. And that is what Kay Khosrow does to perfection. Afrasiab is fooled, thinking this is an innocent idiot. Plus, he loves the kid, so he spares his love. Second time, Kay Khosrow's life is spared. Fast forward, while these wars of vengeance are still going on, the god Surush tells the hero, great Iranian hero, Gudars, in a dream to send his son, Giv, in search of Kay Khosrow. It takes Giv 7 years to find him, and Shabrang and Farangiz. And so the group, navigated by Farangiz's GPS, you remember Siavash had told her how to use that navigation system to fight their own and Siavash's armor that is impenetrable. So Giv fights their way back to Iran with all these goodies. Kay Khosrow succeeds Kay Kavuz, his paternal grandfather, to the throne, and continues to pursue the enemy with a vengeance. But Afrasiab is hard to find. One day, though, a mountain-dwelling hermit called Home finds him, and he is so super strong, he's able to rope him and pull him out of the cave where he's hiding. But Afrasiab escapes with a ruse and plunges into the depths of a lake nearby and cannot be reached. To reach him, they bring his brother Garsivaz and torture him on the shore. Afrasiab cannot stand hearing his brother's cries, emerges from the waters, and Kay Khosrow is able to kill him and his brother. Kay Khosrow then, this is the last bit, Kay Khosrow then reigns for 70 years in peace, prosperity, and piety. And then one day, to everyone's horror, he abdicates the throne, appoints another as king, and goes away. A group of his devotees follow him up a mountain. One night, there's a stream before them. Kay Khosrow bathes in the stream and tells his companions to go home. And they won't listen. At dawn the next day, Kay Khosrow mysteriously disappears, and a snowstorm kills all his companions. That is where Ferdowsi leaves the story, that Kay Khosrow disappears. It's a mystery. But Meskoob expands on the story in order to tell us what is going on. He tells us that in Zoroastrian belief, Kay Khosrow is held to be an immortal. He is in a state of occultation. He will reappear at the end of time and help Sushiyans, the savior figure, eradicate all evil and purify the world and lead it back to a spiritual state, this time eternally. The theme of the death and resurrection of a once at-risk infant is so good, is such a great story that it keeps reinventing itself in various traditions. We have Kay Khosrow in Zoroastrianism, Jesus in Christianity, and the 12th Imam in Shiism. We even have it in science fiction. There's Paul Atreides in Dune, who is an unassuming lad who, after his father is killed, like Siavash, rises up to be the Messiah. So this is how widespread and really appealing that story is. One thing I wanted to note is that in the story of Siavash, gods play little or no role. Soroush comes to dreams a couple of times, and there's mention of fate-dealing stars and astrology, and there's Siavash's magic armor and a horse that can understand human speech and so on. But overall, the story, as Meskoob keeps underlining, is a human story, and the gods do not interfere in their lives. And anyway, their interference is not critical to the plot. So to that point, Ferdowsi's characters, and this is important to know, are not one-dimensional characters. They're Iranian or Turanian. They are complex humans with a psychology of their own. And the richness of Ferdowsi's treatment of these people is such that reading through how they grapple with their lot, the nuances in their sense of mercy or brutality, their convictions and their doubts, it is so rich that, in Meskoob's words, it makes this a particularly Iranian epic. He'll expand on that through the book. And in my mind, Shakespeare would have had a ball with this material, if only it had been available in English. Now to the major themes in the story of Siavash. If you want to take a break, by the way, wave your hands and I'll stop for a couple of minutes. You okay? All right. So to look at the major themes that Meskoob extricate, when we think of epic poetry, we think of superheroes and archvillains and their striking forms and strength and heroic exploits, their special armor and battle gear. Think of the Iliad. There's plenty of that in the story of Siavash as well. But to Meskoob, the essential themes in the story are of a different order. And that is what also makes it peculiar to Iran, in the Iranian epic, that characteristic. I'll go through some of the major themes, not all of them, but most of the major ones. The theme that threads through the story is ethics, which we can think of as sort of cosmic moral order humanized. In his telling, Meskoob's telling, prizing ethics above all else is what distinguishes the Shahnameh from other epics. The Mahabharata, the Iliad, the Nibelungenlied. Remember that it is Siavash's ethics, the fact that he refuses to break an oath, that launches the whole saga. Ferdowsi, is interesting to note, that judges all the protagonists by the same standard of ethics. For instance, he celebrates Rostam for initially being the first to stand up to avenge Siavash when news of his death arrive. But he deplores him when he conducts this mad rampage, massacring and slashing and burning the enemy. Another theme that is critical to Meskoob's analysis is time. Though time is not a calculus in the epic itself. It is to Meskoob, not to the epic itself, and I explain how, why. Ferdowsi often refers to the turning wheel of time. It's a mystery, but he uses it formulaically and moves on. In fact, in our story, time doesn't have a material effect on the heroes. Rostam lives to be 600 and is as robust in his old age as he was in his youth. Same with Gudarz, the other great Iranian hero, who is as fit and alert in his ancient age as is his son, Giv. But to Meskoob, we can only grasp the full import, the depth, if you will, of the tragedy of Siavash in reference to the religious notion of cosmic time. In Zoroastrianism, time has a fixed beginning and end. It's a 9,000-year cycle that bookends the battle between good and evil. When time ends, creation achieves an eternal spiritual state, as we've said. Human life is a tool along this trajectory. It is in service to that mission, that cosmic mission. Siavash must die so that Kay Khosrow may rise and destroy evil on earth. So on that platform of thinking cosmically, Meskoob raises Kay Khosrow to the station of the perfect man in Islamic mysticism and the receptor of the light of lights in illuminationist philosophy. Now, good and evil is itself another major theme. To Meskoob, the belief that existence is based on a moral order, that humans were created in order that they may fight evil, distinguishes Zoroastrianism from other religious traditions, and is an entrenched outlook that makes the Shahnameh distinctly Iranian epic. Ferdowsi is not a Zoroastrian, right? He's a Sunni, maybe Shia, we don't know, there's a lot of discussion. Muslim, he's a Muslim. But what Meskoob is saying is that that concept of the moral order as underpinning creation, which is very Zoroastrian, underlies Shahnameh's at least characterization of the figures, if not the plot. One theme that reveals a lot about Meskoob's own mind, to me, is history. He goes to great lengths to show how Sasanian history and social profile became woven into the story of Siavash over time. And that in turn, Ferdowsi wove the ethos of his own time into the story. Meskoob says, it's interesting that Ferdowsi thought he was relating ancient history when he wrote the Shahnameh, but in fact, he was expressing, writing, reflectiveness through his own mores and risks. The mores not both personal as well as societal. So we see the footprints of history everywhere in epic if we dig. And he goes on to say that the story, although now fixed, because until now, oral traditional stories, there's never a fixed form. You know, they float around, themes, stories, but once they get written, they become fixed if they're well written, and the Shahnameh is very well written. So Meskoob is saying that although the story is now fixed in writing, it is still not immutable. And indeed, he reads the story, what we're reading in Lament, he reads the story through the filter of his own time in the 20th century. He's saying that history is not a sealed vacuum chamber, it's like an organic laboratory. He might have said with Faulkner that the past is never dead. It is not even past. To move on to another theme, truth. Truth, asha, or there's another word for it, erta, which is in both Vedic and Avestan, mean order and right and justice, and is the root of the word right. So truth is the opposite of lie, drug or druj, drug in Persian. In the Avesta, truth is loaded with, is a loaded word, and it relates, it implies, it expresses also, as I said, order and justice. It's like somewhat similar to the notion of dharma in Hinduism. It's a force that holds the universe together like gravity. To disturb it is to throw order out of balance and bring injustice. So these truth, order, and justice are connected. In the epic, Garsivaz's lie to his brother Afrasiab shatters the balance that holds between Iran and Turan and brings injustice upon Siavash. We can relate to that. That's an easy enough concept to understand. But what is a bit more complicated is that Meskoob offers an alternative definition of justice at scale. He argues that religiously thinking, the injustice in killing Siavash is actually justice because it leads eventually to the salvation and the deliverance of the world through Kay Khosrow. It's a situation where justice, or an argument where justice kind of has a shifting position on the quantum versus the macro level. The next theme, martyrdom, is a very interesting discussion in the book. Meskoob holds that martyrdom can only occur in oppressive societies. In mythology, for example, Siavash was a hero who met his death like a warrior. But in epic, which evolved in an insular Sasanian society where people felt at the mercy of higher powers, Siavash turns into lamentable fatalist who goes to his death without a fight. Similarly, in post-Islamic Iran, Meskoob points out, Imam Hussein, the second Shia Imam, who in history was a valiant and courageous man, turns in Shiism into a pitiable martyr who is mourned as such in processions and in drama and so forth. So there is oppressive society produces fatalistic heroes who kind of give up. It's a very unusual and original reading of the hero Siavash, who's held in tremendously high regard in Iranian traditions. To understand him as a passive fatalist is a very different level of approaching the story or the Shahnameh. Another sort of related, let's say, theme is fate and fortune. These are relatively minor themes, but they're important in relation to the last two. So we're coming to the end almost, the last two that we'll talk about. In the epic, human fate is said to be designed by the Creator and written in the stars. Kavus is fated to sire Siavash, who is fated to be killed in Turan. Voila. Like fate, fortune is out of one's hands. Luck is random. For instance, Siavash says, I'm a man of ill fortune. So they're aware of it, something called luck. Today, of course, fate is dead. We think of genes and environmental factors and other things that control our lives. We don't speak of fate. But luck hasn't gone out of fashion yet. We still speak of luck. Anyway, one of the most critical themes in Meskoob is self-purpose. Khishkari in Persian. The word itself doesn't appear in the Shahnameh. In Zoroastrian thought, every human is assigned a self-purpose at birth, and performing it has consequences. In myth, for instance, the king Jamshid, his self-purpose is to protect civilization. But then he lies, which goes against the grains of a just king. He lies, so his royal glory abandons him, and he is cut up in two by a dragon, who then reigns over Iran for 1,000 years. In religion, so that's in mythology, in myth and religion, Kay Khosrow has a dual self-purpose. On the one hand, his purpose is to get rid of Afrasiab on earth, who stands for evil, and his other purpose is to help get rid of Ahriman, the cosmic counterpart, in the heavens. And in epic, Siavash's self-purpose is to be a virtuous prince. He delivers. He chooses to die, so it says in the Shahnameh, so his blood may boil sort of through the veins of the earth and bring about that vengeance. So self-purpose is key to understanding, from Meskoob's position, key to understanding the consequences of behavior, and also a proposition that everybody, every human, has a self-purpose of their own. Again, this is kind of close to Hindu thinking of dharma, although it's not religious so much as existential. You have to do something on earth, do it. And now we've come to what I think is the key theme in Lament. Meskoob begins the opening chapter, Twilight, with a Zoroastrian liturgy from Yasna 30, line 3. So these are used in prayers and in ritual by officiants. In the beginning, the twin spirits of good and evil revealed themselves in better and poorer thoughts, words, and deeds. Between these two, that is, between good and evil, the wise chose rightly, the unwise not so. This is how Meskoob begins Lament. Of course, the thought that we speak, think, and act by choice also presumes consciousness and free will, right? And that is a tricky proposition when applied to our epic anyway, given that prefixed fate and idiosyncratic traits like folly and wisdom and courage and mercy and what have you inform the behavior of the heroes. Fate and these traits, personal traits, how exactly do we think that they act freely? Are they free to choose their actions the way the liturgy proposes? Take Afrasiab, for instance, who's probably the most interesting and complex character in the whole story. He's brave, but he will flee whenever he's at risk, too much at risk. He can be generous, but he can be unmanly. He kills King Nozar, who's his captive. He's canny, but he's also fooled by a cannier man, his brother Garsivaz. He has a heart. He adores Siavash, well, until he doesn't, and spares Kay Khosrow twice out of compassion. He mourns his beloved Piran when he's killed in battle by Gudars, and he can't stand to hear his brother cry under torture. Afrasiab is also fearful and suspicious, which changes him from being a well-wishing leader to what he never wished to be, an evil-minded, disoriented, and confounded monarch. He never wished to be. In Meskoob's words, citing phrases from the Shahnameh. Oops, I don't know what I did here, but Afrasiab cannot think straight when listening to Garzifaz's lies about Siavash and says Siavash must die. In Meskoob's words, fear has stifled his freedom of thought and action. He's obsessed by power. So now we know all these traits, up and down, and left and right, in Afrasiab. Do you think he's exercising his free will when he makes decisions, when he thinks, speaks, or acts? Does he have a choice? Is he self-aware? Meskoob's answer to all these questions is a firm yes. He argues that Afrasiab is conscious of exactly what he's doing. The contradictory traits that he exhibits are not inherent, but acquired by the choices that he makes. It is he who lets love fill his heart when he's looking at this idiot, Kay Khosrow, standing in front of him. He consciously lets this or that emotion seduce him. So, in other words, he's saying, Meskoob, it is he who freely chooses his own fate. If only he'd chosen wisely and not killed Siavash. They could have lived happily ever after, but then we wouldn't have had a story. The debate about fate, free will, and consciousness was prevalent long before Ferdowsi in Pahlavi wisdom literature. Their fate generally won the debate, but not completely, because after all, how is anyone accountable if they're not responsible for their behavior? So the writers of these wisdom literary pieces had to sort of sort through that debate is still alive today and thrives among psychologists, philosophers, and theologians, and is passionately argued along both ends of the spectrum by scientists. Here on the Stanford campus, the neurobiologist, Professor Robert Sapolsky, believes that humans are, are mere biological machines, and that consciousness is no more than a level of arousal in the nervous system. So that's where he stands. But then again, just a week ago, experts in cognitive and neuroscience and psychology and philosophy at NYU argued that not only humans, and they brought lots of proof, right? Lab proof. They argued that not only humans, but even insects and fishes have consciousness. Crayfish, for instance, exhibit anxiety and can be treated by anti-anxiety drugs. And, and bees enjoy playing with balls, tiny little balls. Bees can feel happy. So you have the two ends of the spectrum. To wait for that debate to end, so we know whether our heroes in the story of Siavash act by choice or by design, is like waiting for Godot. So as long as we're talking about heroes here on a university campus, I thought of ending with a line from E. Cummings' advice to students. To be nobody but yourself, he said, to be nobody but yourself is the hardest battle that any human being can fight. I don't know about you, but Meskoob and Ferdowsi would agree. Thank you. Thank you. Did you want to take questions? And yes, or people may, yes? Any questions that I can answer? Don't ask questions that I cannot. Yes?
I would like to go to the martyrdom
yes.
that you mentioned. Now I realize I have thought always that it's Islam that makes Hussein, and this is that up to now we see that everyone, that side, the Hezbollah, if someone die in Syria, they call it Shaheed, and even the opposition to Hezbollah in Iran, when they die, also people call them Shaheed.
Yes.
It means that this is, as you mentioned, the martyrdom idea belongs to the suppressed society, kind of, or suppressed mentality. At the same time, when I compare this with Jesus, Jesus also kind of was like Siavash, died and raised the same way that Siavash flower that came up and so on. And I'm wondering if you have done any research about which factor that makes it different in two society. Like in Iran, for me, is a question. We see the opposition called, this one gets Shaheed, that one gets Shaheed. They use the word Shaheed. And I always wonder, 92% against the 6%, they cannot go and just, I'm asking, yeah. Like why they don't attack. But then we see in US, for instance, people go and take the gun and go and attack. What is that makes that difference between action, present action after 1,000 years, with the same background of mentality? What is the factor that makes it difference?
I mean, in a nutshell, there is no difference. Because the concept of martyrdom of Shaheed, is somebody who gives up their life for a cause. So think about it. If you're on this side of a cause, you will think of your people as martyrs. And if you're on the other side, you'll also think of your people as martyrs, if they have fought for your cause, if these people have fought for it. So it's not about Hezbollah or this or that Islamic group or Christian or anything. It's about giving up your life for a larger cause, which then, as Meskoob's discussion is really quite wonderful, he says it seeps, that concept of giving up your life seeps through society and creates then thousands of martyrs at heart. That is to say, not martyrs giving up their lives necessarily, but people who claim that cause, because they're so moved by this loss that the loss is never a loss. It actually grows to others.
But my question was not that. I agree with you. This is the mentality in Iran from both sides are the same. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking what is the make it difference. Yeah.
Every person has one question.
We'll come back to you if there's time, if there are no other questions. Any other questions?
So from a history perspective, very objectively speaking, there's a lot of similarity between stories in Judaism and Christianity.
I'm deaf. I have to come up so I can hear you. I'm not completely deaf, but half deaf.
So I'm asking from a history perspective and very objectively, putting metaphysics aside, there are similarities in Judaism, Dastan Yusuf, Joseph. Wife of a king falls in love with a handsome, innocent youth, right? And then, or Dastan Abraham has to go through fire and so on. Again, objectively speaking, could there be just a singular story that everybody is getting inspired from? Or Siavash has been mentioned in Avesta as well, right?
Right, absolutely. Right. He's in the Avesta, so is Kay Khosrow.
So the question is, could there be just one story that everybody is getting inspired from?
Yeah, that's a very good question, but it will take like maybe a semester to talk about it. The thing is that, do I need to get back behind the thing? These stories, everything that we've said, the story of Siavash type, the prototype, is a mixture of Indo-European and Semitic traditions. So for instance, the story of an unassuming nobody who becomes a leader is told like 2400 BC about Sargon of Akkad, because he rose to be a king whose statues are in museums, you know, lawmaker, lawgiver, and so on. The same story is told about, so that's Semitic, right? Akkadian. It is also told about Cyrus the Great, who, although of royal blood, like Kay Khosrow, but he's a nobody. Nobody knows him until in his youth, like at 15, he's playing games with his friends, and he shows incredible prowess and wisdom and so forth. So he's discovered and becomes Cyrus the Great. It is told about, that's Iranian. Then you've got Oedipus in Greek mythology. You've got Romulus and Remus in Roman mythology. It just goes, and there are many more. It goes, how exactly and when exactly, aside from, just to confuse you a little bit more even, of how these stories get into each other, the flood story that we find in, about Jamshid in the Avesta, where he saves civilization by building an underground, Var it's called, and brings in animals and plants and everything so they survive a particularly harsh, not particularly, it's just a devastating winter, is a flood story. Initially, the earliest we know of one is in the Gilgamesh story, right? And then you find it in Indian traditions. We don't know exactly how these stories transferred, where they originated and how they transferred. You know, the way out explanation of a lot of these coincidental stories or motifs and so on is Jungian theory, who thought that there is a collective unconscious, that there are certain ideas, if you like Platonic ideas that occur to everyone, and so they express themselves in the same forms, prototypes and so on. We don't know exactly what. What we do know is that we find elements of the same stories that have survived for thousands of years across both the Indo-European and the Semitic traditions. I don't know if that answers your question, but there's, to get into it further would be, like I said.
Yes, about these thousands of years, and we don't know. The library in Alexandria was burned down, and I recently heard there were 1 million volumes, or I don't know what books were like at that time, but we may have had some more insight had that library survived, perhaps.
Not only libraries, but other archaeological material. I mean, any artifact or any pieces of writing helps. But take Iran. Writing was not a great thing in Iran. The cuneiform writing was probably invented under Darius, but it isn't until much later, until Sasanian times, that we actually get writing There's this priest Cartier who writes his biography, actually also his profile is inscribed in stone all over the place in Fars. And so we have a document, to go by. But without enough archaeological or linguistic evidence, oh, by the way, language and philology, parsing whatever documents have survived in mythology and religion. And by the way, I feel awful talking about mythology and religion the way I do, because what we call myth, some people call religion. But so I mean, this is university campus, so you know what I'm talking about. But I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So anyway, yes, and myths and religious stories, any text that remains is extremely helpful. We have a lot of Avestan texts, for instance. We have a lot of Pahlavi texts. It's not always possible to read them right because we don't have a grammar. So this is the other thing that is very helpful when you have enough commonality between two traditions that you can reach out to the other one as sort of backup to try and understand vicariously this. And this is how actually whole Indo-European studies came about, when somebody discovered, a couple of hundred years ago that, Zeus in the Greek tradition is the same as Dios in the Sanskrit, the Vedic, and so on, and then the whole study of Indo-European languages and myths and so on developed. So I don't want to say that we're at the infancy by any means, but there are so many questions that remain unanswered, that generations and generations after us are going to be standing here and talking about the background, because they will discover new things. Any other questions? Yes.
So I've been thinking about this on some of the characters. You were mentioning about destiny, right?
Yes.
And how, some of it is written. Unfortunately, it seems like throughout Shahnameh, be it like Zahak, or be it Koshtas, or be it, in this case, like there's always a dream that comes to the bad guy that, kind of hints at, like the thing that's coming up, right?
I want to make sure that I'm hearing you right. You're saying that in the Shahnameh there are these bad guys who come to power?
No, they get a heads up about the person that's going to either unseat them. And they have that, like advanced knowledge, so to speak, right? To do something about it.
Yes.
Then you have these other guys like Esfandiar or Sohrab, and they never get any kind of heads up,
Yeah, right.
And so it's it's almost like destiny is helping the bad guys to...
No, don't read it. No, this is literature. It's where we get drama. These are elements that give us drama. You identify with somebody who's dreamed, or astrologers have told him, or he knows somehow that, oh my gosh, this guy is going to get up and kill me. The story of Jesus, right? And, King of Jews, send the soldiers, let's get rid of, all the children and pregnant women and so on. This is, it's an element of drama for you to know, and then for the writer, the poet, whoever is telling the story, to participate in that, to engage in that, to feel it. It's an emotional roller coaster that you go through. That, oh my gosh, is Afrasiab going to kill this little baby, Kay Khosrow? And then he doesn't. Somebody mediates it. So it's a storytelling element. Like I said, we invent stories, partly in mythology to explain the world, and a huge part of it is to entertain. Epic literature is basically high entertainment. Somebody like Meskoob goes and digs up the myths and the religious thoughts underneath the story. But in essence, this is entertainment. And so for entertainment, you need, I mean, like I said, if Afrasiab hadn't killed Siavash, we wouldn't be here in this room today talking about it, because nothing would happen. No, they get advance notice. Good people, good guys get advance notice as well. Yeah, and Siavash, for instance, knows in advance. Ferdowsi doesn't spell out how exactly, but he knows. He has this esoteric knowledge. He knows that he's going to die if he responds to the summons that Afrasiab did. His wife Farangis, he tells Farangis, I'm not coming back. She begs him not to go. She begs her father, don't kill my husband, he's innocent. You're going to get yourself killed. She's also prescient. You're going to get yourself killed if you kill Siavash. But they won't listen. So knowing in advance, being prescient, is not just bad guys. Yes?
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it fully. And I was reading through your brief bio in the email that was forwarded to us. And besides culture, history, linguistics, I also noticed symbolism.
I have to come up to you.
There is this notion of communication between Siavash and Shahrokh, and also between Raksh and Rostam. How do you and Meskoob see this bond in terms of wisdom reflected through the horse and its owner? How do you see that reflected?
Okay, I'll give you my understanding. Meskoob does talk about Shahrokh, but not as much as he would like to. The thing is that across the world of mythology, great powers like gods always have, or most of them, have an animal that they identify with. We have these couples like Shahrokh and Raksh in the Shahnameh. Think of all the gods and goddesses in Greek mythology in Rome. Essentially, the horse of all these animals, a lion may express power, for instance, and this and that. But the horse, at a very basic level, is your walking feet at a much faster pace. A hero who needs to go places can use a horse as an icon, as a companion, as a rider, because the two are the same. The horse is an animal form, if you will, of the hero. This is true of a lot of gods and goddesses in mythologies all over the world as well. They are the human and animal forms of each other. My dissertation, which was on a group of symbols that have mithra and riding and a horse and a dog, a hound running with them, goes back to, so in my research, the horse goes back to way back when hunters were the people who provided meat for their society, where the others did hunting and gathering of fruits and so on. It's the hunter who had to go out of civilization, out of the civilized world, right out into the wild, and come back with meat. And so the hunter is a symbol. This is interesting. These characters who ride mighty horses, who are also wise and they can talk to and so forth, are like hunters, liminal characters. They have characteristics of both civilization and the wild, of the divine and the human. They can stretch between two different worlds. They can walk the two worlds. And this is true. So in my study, for instance, I came to look at Mithra, exegesis, all of these characters of, the savior figures, all of whom are liminal characters. They're not like your typical human. They are half divine, half human, or half evil, half good. A lot of characters in the Shahnameh, even Siavash himself, are half-breeds. Siavash's mother is a Turanian princess that some Iranians find in a forest. She's in a state because she has been robbed of her jewelry, of everything, and she's been chased, and she's in real trouble. And she's also very beautiful, so the two guys who find her want her, but they don't know which can have her. So they take her back to court. Of course, the king looks at the girl and says, she's mine. And she is the mother of Siavash. In Kay Khosrow himself, right? His mother is a Turanian, Paradis. His father is an Iranian, who's almost also half Iranian Turanian. These liminalities are what explains the ability of these heroes to walk between two civilizations, to talk two languages. I sometimes think that those of us who were in exile, not in our own country, have these characteristics because we have to learn to negotiate between two cultures. And so we can translate, from one to another. We carry both. For another talk, one would go over the mothers of these characters. It's fascinating. In Zoroastrianism, there are three sons of Zoroaster who were born to him posthumously, who are saviors in millennial order. The last one, for instance, Sushians, is the one under whom the world goes to renovation. They are born of virgin girls who get impregnated by the seed of Zoroaster that have been kept magically alive in a lake. They bathe in the lake. They're virgins. They, one by one, they become pregnant, and they bear these three brothers who end the last 3,000 years of the world. It just goes on. Jesus, his mother is a woman, but the father is God. Stories of other historical figures that became legendary or became so in legend, mythical, like Alexander, same thing. He's either, he's a Macedonian, he's a Greek, right? But his mom is perhaps the daughter of Darius of Baram, the king of Iran. Or in other stories about Alexander, a lot of legends developed after Alexander. His mother, the queen, the father is Philip, so there's a king and a queen, all fully human, but one night, a god comes to her, to the queen, in the form of a snake. He's a snake, but he tricks her into thinking that it is her husband. And so that is how Alexander is born. So all of this, to go back to your first question, all these elements, whether consciously or not, I have no clue, consciously or not, they inform the characters of these great heroes who go the distance between two distances. Yes?
So we're out of time. We can ask the question after. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely have to have you back for another lecture.
All right.
It's a fascinating.
Oh my gosh, it's 8 o'clock.
Yeah, sorry. We can definitely ask after.